My greatest fear is that we're passing to the next generation problems that we ourselves haven't been able to solve.
Mm.
Racism, environmental degradation, political polarization. And some of these problems are existential. That if they don't get solved, some significant things might not happen.
Welcome to Toddle School Leaders Project. I'm your host, Cindy Blackburn, and today I talked with Dr. Derek Mitchell. In this episode, we get real that at this time, it's kind of tricky to be an educator. There are lots of changes happening that can put people into a place of fear and scarcity. But Dr. Mitchell's work centers on the idea of abundance and how we can lead through the idea of possibilities thinking and what's within our control as leaders. So let's dive into how you can make your school a place of abundance and possibility. Dr. Derek Mitchell, I'm so excited to have you on the podcast today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here.
I'd love for you to kind of set the stage for our audience and just tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do that you're most passionate about.
Certainly. I am Derek Mitchell. I work with an organization called Partners in School Innovation. And our work is most focused on helping leaders and teachers deliver excellence on the ground so that every student in their schools thrive. We do that by helping them develop what we call a lively, loving learning community. And this is a place where it's a brilliant place to teach, to learn, and to grow, and to lead. And that requires concentrating on culture and academic excellence, right? Together, not one or the other, both together. And so we've worked all over the country and here in the U.S. Have gotten some pretty outstanding results. And so I'm super excited to share some of what we've learned.
I love that. I love that you bring up the tension that exists there because I think often it feels like we can either have a strong school culture or we can perform well. And so I think removing that dichotomy and starting to explore how they both strengthen and enrich each other.
Mm-hmm. Precisely. I mean, there are brilliant stories of schools where students are all excelling academically and a third of them are mentally challenged and problematic just from a maintaining of themselves and lots of suicide risk and lots of social anxiety and related pieces. There's also the inverse, stories of these schools that are loving and embracing and kids are happy and there's just no learning going on.
Right.
Right. And so the ideal, of course, and what everyone's aspiring to is a school where both those truths are in place, where students are reaching their academic and intellectual potential in a way that respects them as humans, appreciates what they bring, their uniqueness, their interest, their specialness, and that forges community, among the students, between the teachers and students, among the teachers, between the teachers and leadership. That there's a sort of inertia to the quality of love of being there and being in community with one another. Right?
Well, what a
That's
beautiful
what we all
balance.
aspire to. Right.
Yeah, and that's our goal for life, right? Nobody wants to be driven only by work or only by pleasure. Like it's the goal to find that perfect balance between both that makes life worth living, meaningful.
Yeah, certainly is the case for me.
Love that. So one thing that stood out to me in your work is you talk often about the concept of abundance, which really called to me because abundance is one of my top 5 core values. So when I heard that, my ears kind of perked up. But the opposite of abundance is scarcity. So might we begin with a scarcity mindset, what that looks like in schools and like how that impacts decision making?
Sure. So a scarcity mindset problematizes the students, their neediness, the lacks, whatever the lacks happen to be, lack
Right.
of behavior, lack of achievement, preparation, lack of resources to come to school ready, whatever the lacks are. A scarcity mindset focuses on the lacks, focuses on the deficits. And literally, if you think about it, just ideologically, if there is such a thing as a medium status or a norm, however you might define it, Focusing on the lacks would be angled toward getting folks to the norm. So you would be focusing on whatever's missing down here to bring people to here. But who wants to be norm?
Right.
Right? I mean, everyone wants to be excellent. Folks want to be happy, exuberant, fulfilled, not norm. Not regular, not common.
Getting by.
Exactly, not just getting by. And so to get beyond any norming, you have to actually think about what inspires, what develops agency, what makes folks leap outside of what they think are their own possibilities. And so focusing not on the scarcity mindset, but more on a vision of abundance, of a perspective around richness. The idea that quality is multifaceted, right? And that a desire for excellence lives inside each person. It's just a question of being in enough community with them to help them bring it out. That's really the difference. To some degree, it's a mental model shift, right? So, if you're driving to school, thinking about deficits and scarcity, that's not a very good drive.
Right.
But if you're driving on the way to school, thinking about abundance, thinking about richness, thinking about what's going to enable each young one you encounter that day to leave that encounter motivated to be their best positive self, that's actually a much nicer drive to school, right? It level sets, your own Vimbas, right? The emotions, the tones, the vibrations inside you, but it also positions each person with an openness to the possibility, right? Of being better, doing better, and not just a downward looking mindset around lack and scarcity and need.
This can feel a bit theoretical. Might you share some examples of what it looks like when schools are making decisions from scarcity?
Sure. One real indication that I see among school leaders with a scarcity mindset is the framing of how they talk about problems and solutions. If people are the problems and they themselves are the solutions, they're operating from a scarcity mindset just from the start. I can one building leader thinking about working with a set of new teachers and having a problematizing mental model for it. They don't know this. They never had that. They're not prepared to X. Rather than thinking about their newness as an opportunity, right? And being open to what experiences that they have had and what assets they do bring, and being open to hearing about those and leveraging those in the plan to execute and implement at the school. Same people, same situation, two very different mental models for how you tackle the problem, right? Or the challenge, as folks think about it. Another great example that you hear in the classroom are teachers problematizing parents, right? They are absent. They don't care. Can't reach. I can't find. They're not supportive. Whatever the lacks are, right?
Right.
Rather than thinking instead about parents as your core ally and collaborator in delivering excellence with their young people. The parents know their young people more and better than any teacher can in most cases. And just being in a robust community with parents can help you understand what can unlock motivation, help students, think outside of their own sort of protective shells to reach their better potential. And so the biggest frame for scarcity versus abundance is the openness and willingness to engage with the other adults in the space, with curiosity, with willingness to collaborate and learn, and to leverage what they do bring rather than to problematize what they don't.
It makes me wonder because I think hearing this, like, do you see it as, is there an opportunity there to explore potential barriers still, or is it always just glass half full?
Um, the
I
truth
don't
of the
know.
matter is, it's always both,
Right,
right? The question is, what's going to motivate you, each person, to bring their best self to the challenge,
right.
right? And sustainably bring their best selves to the challenge. I don't know how many leaders and teachers we've encountered in our work that are just burned out.
Yeah.
Why? Because they've been banging their heads against the scarcity wall, and living in this place of lack and doubt and uh, uh, no real sense and openness to the opportunity and the resources that are really right across the hall in some cases with teachers or
Right.
on the other side of the school building on the case of leaders. The one of the biggest challenges we encounter is when there's a sense on the part of the school team that they're alone,
Mm,
that there's no one but them to help all these young people reach their potential. Nothing could be further from the truth. Even in the most heavily impacted by poverty community, outside of that school are a myriad of resources that could be brilliantly helpful, from the corner bodega, right, where students can learn entrepreneurship, right, to the music school, down the street where you can partner with and share instruments. I mean, so there's tons of opportunity, literally just on the other side of the wall of that building.
mm.
If you're open to seek it out and be in robust community with others, and think about schooling as something other than what happens inside a structure, but that is really a part of a mosaic of supports for
Mm.
kids and families.
So kind of shifting that mindset to the how might we mindset. It sounds a little like how might we? How might this happen? And I wonder, there's a framework that you've introduced, the skill, will, and way. And is that kind of your roadmap for going from scarcity into abundance?
It absolutely is. And this is a long learned, hard learned lesson from mentors in my life who were master superintendents and school leaders. Um, that every framework you've ever seen related to leadership development or school support breaks down to really those three things,
Cool.
right? The skill to execute against what's expected, whatever that is, right? Um,
What might that look
the
like? What are some common
Well,
skills that you find need to be nurtured?
think about leaders, literally the skill to lead, right? The facilitation, teaching as a skill, teaching literacy, at middle school, for instance, when, middle school teachers are like, well, I teach books, not kids to read. Kids should know how to read before they get to me,
Mm,
right? That's a scarcity mindset, right? That's a lack you're pointing to rather than an opportunity you're looking to unlock, right? And so there are lots of skills in any given moment in any school. There are dozens of skills being executed, right?
So then how do you as a leader identify which skills need to be developed? Because it sounds almost infinite, right? Everything's a skill. Then what skills do I focus on?
Right. The ones related to your plan, right?
Okay.
So a lot of what we do with schools, we partners, we talk about putting our shoulder to the leader's wheel.
Hmm.
And that means, what are you trying to accomplish? And it's the first question we ask them: what are you trying to accomplish this year? Let's get it, written down. Let's get it super clear. What are you trying to accomplish this year? And then once we're clear about that, we can do all we can to support the implementation against it, right? And
So
so
for
first it
example, that
starts
might
with the
be
plan.
engagement or that might be low literacy levels. And then from there we'd say, okay, then what are the skills of in building engagement? That might
Right.
look like social emotional awareness. That might look like parent communications or community engagements.
You got it. Exactly right.
Okay,
So whatever the core that they're trying to accomplish in a given school year, right?
cool.
So you focus on the skills needed to implement those things powerfully well. You mentioned literacy. That's one great accelerator for student academic achievement is when they're powerfully literate, not just in reading, but in writing and in expressing. Right. And so the question then becomes, do our teachers have the skill to produce brilliant readers, brilliant speakers, and brilliant writers? And if not, what do we do to build those skills? Traditional strategies all apply, as well as some untraditional ones. Professional development, coaching, you know, teachers working together in grade level collaborations. I mean, all the related strategies that work. So skill is key, because it's the piece that makes the work a profession,
Right.
and not just an avocation. Right, something that someone does for a while. Right, skill comes with repetition
Mm.
and a commitment to improve. Right. I could tell a quick story of a teacher I had that taught the exact same lessons in the exact same sequence every year, and I had the unfortunate experience of being promoted from fourth grade into her seventh, eighth grade fusion class because I tested really well as a fourth grader. The school misinterpreted the data that said I tested at a seventh grade level to mean that I was ready for seventh grade.
Oh.
And so they moved me to this grade with this teacher, and she had one of those huge panafolds that folds
Yep.
out that has a slot for every day of the week, and every week of the month, and every month of the year, and she would just pull out the worksheets and the materials for each one. And so by
Oof.
the time I was in that class for the third year, I'm taking tests from memory. Right, I'm going on my way to school. What were the fifth week's spelling words? And writing them down and seeing if I was right. Um, and so this teacher had, to develop the actual skill, to teach the kids she currently has, as opposed
Mm.
to the high will she had of teaching what she had taught before in the same sequence that she had taught it before. Right. So skill being really key. Adults tend to learn skills under specific circumstances and not under others.
Hmm.
Emotional safety is critical
Very much so.
for adults to learn skills. And so, so they have to be willing to and made safe to fail, and to experiment. But skill is key. Will is even more important.
Mm. Mindset?
Um, Yes, it is a core mindset, that is really about um, how an adult approaches what's expected. Right. Um, Will is really hard to build, and so it's often something you recruit for.
Okay.
Um, but it can be built, and for most adults, the fastest way to build it is through peer association, through relationships. So having the person that they do appreciate and believe in and respect work alongside them and
Hmm.
ask the question, hey, do you really want to do this? How does it need to change to increase your willingness to make this happen? Right. Um, uh,
It sounds
Will
almost
is, yeah, go ahead.
it sounds almost synonymous with collective teacher efficacy, the belief that together we can. Would those be synonymous, will and collective efficacy?
Not exactly. Collective efficacy builds will, and it's only present where there's a lot of will.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? And it's one strategy. There are other strategies for building will too. Often promotions produce will, greater will. Um, uh, Changing the remuneration can produce will.
Hmm.
You don't often have that option in most schools and
Right.
systems, right? Um, Finding something else that they really like and making that an opportunity, can produce will. Few
Those
adults
sound
will.
more like external motivators, though, which might have like a short-term impact. Like if we're looking at the research on agency, typically the most powerful experience would be master experiences. So setting a goal and actually achieving it is the number one way that we build the belief that, oh, I can actually do things. So is
Mhm.
that a piece that comes into play as well of setting shared expectations and having those shared mastery experiences?
Sure. So I wouldn't necessarily call them mastery experiences per se,
Hmm.
but successful experiences,
Cool.
right? Builds will. We call it ROSI at Partners. We use results oriented cycles of inquiry or cycles of improvement.
Cool.
And that's where you identify a small change in practice that will produce an outsized outcome on that the teacher expects, so that when they see that outcome, they're like, "Ooh,
I get it.
how did that happen? Wow! When I change my practice, kids learn."
Right.
And then they lean into the next one and the next one and the next one. So, but the combined set at the end of the day leaves the teacher more open to their own agency, more willing to change their practice, more excited about the opportunity of those changes producing outsized outcomes for both themselves and for their students. Right. But will is particularly with a seasoned veteran is notoriously difficult to change.
Right.
Um, and
Agency
so
begins with efficacy. If you don't believe you can, then you're not going to develop the skills to be able to.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And the last piece seems like it's simple, but it isn't. And we call it way. So
Mm.
having a way forward, having a plan, right? It's where skill and will meets the road, right? Without a plan to do robust collaboration, it won't happen.
Right.
Right? Without the time set aside in the schedule and the expectation that it's a part of the work, not separate from it, and the structure to facilitate it and execute it really well so that people experience it as a good use of their time, it just won't work. Or even if it does happen, it won't be sustained. Right.
Right.
So everything you want to do that you want to do deeply and well, everything that a teacher or a leader wants to accomplish needs a path, needs a way forward.
Mm.
Um, all three of these, when worked on and present in high quotient quantities, produces excellence in outcomes.
Well,
Um, you experience the school as it's experienced by folks who visit it is like a cool breeze on a hot day. Folks are like, wow, kids are
yeah.
motivated, teachers are focused, leaders are out there being present and embracing. Everyone knows what they're up to and what that is, what the importance of what that is to where they're trying to go. It just is experienced by everyone as what we described as a lively, loving learning environment. The absence of those three things and schools experienced as a place where we warehouse kids,
Right.
and have adults who are unhappy being there, watching them while they're there, and not caring much about them when they're not.
Like a prison or like a workshop or like a factory, which
Right,
that's the
right,
model. It's just okay, let's get through another year as
right,
opposed to, you know, where might there be space for making a little magic happen?
right, right. And those places that counter narrative aren't places where people stay for long if they have
Right.
options. Which then means the ones who do stay there for a long time are more often folks without options,
Right.
which means they're the least likely to build the skill or the will to change.
Mm. So is step one as a leader then recognizing a manageable problem? Because it feels like skill, will, and way have to be applied to a
Something.
problem. And
Yes.
so I guess my wondering there is, as a leader, how do you choose where to begin? Because I mean, there's a million ways to skin a cat, right? There's a lot, I'm sure, lots of different things we could peg as issues in our school. How do you identify a problem that's manageable within a 1 year chunk of time?
Yeah, I suggest often to leaders, you start with yourself.
Mm,
Start with you. Like, what are you here to do?
cool.
Why here? versus someplace else, right? Because it really does start with you, right? And your ability to enter that space with your own agency and your own clarity about what you're here to contribute, what you're here to learn, um, begins the conversation right there. Right, start with yourself. Um, uh, then start from there to be clear about what it is you're going to try to accomplish, and often that means get in community with others and talk about what's going on.
Right.
Right, get a sense of the place, a sense of the current status, the sense of what happened over the summer, right? Versus what's going on now, so that you're in community with the other adults, and start to form the teaming that you need to be effective together, right?
Mm.
Once you've done those two things, you can tackle any set of specific challenges, changes, reforms, strategies. But without those two as a grounding, you holding yourself accountable to delivering on what's going to be fulfilling and effective in your leadership in the space, and enrolling and being in community with the
Mm.
other adults that are there, in any strategy is implementable. Um, the absence of those two things, then you're doing what Dr. Rudy Crew, who's a master superintendent, used to talk about a warm pool versus a cold pool strategy.
Hmm.
So a cold pool, whenever someone gets in, they pop right out because it's freezing cold.
Yeah, too much.
And so a leader who's operating a cold pool strategy is running around pushing people in around the edge. And by the time they get all the way around the pool, everyone's been popped right back out
I love
because the
that.
water is too cold. A warm pool leader gets in the pool, backstrokes, just having a grand old time, soliciting folks to join them. Once you get in and get in community with others and get them in the pool, um, you can accomplish, any set of strategies or structures. Right. It's just when you're running around the edge, pushing them in because they don't have agency and they don't have voice and they haven't contributed to any of what you're talking about, they're going to pop themselves right back out when you're not looking at them. Right.
I love that. Are there, other than kind of like a vibe check, are there other pieces of data that are important to look at this stage? Like maybe not specifically testing data, but
What's
enrollment
wrong with
data.
testing data? What's wrong with testing data? You can look
I
at
mean, it's
testing
one
data.
data point,
Yeah,
right? But we
yeah,
don't want
exactly.
to base all of our reform off one data
Especially
point.
if you're looking at growth, right? You want to look at growth. You want to know what is the trajectory of this place.
Right.
Is it going like this or is it going like this?
Mm.
Because those are two very different situations, right? And so looking at the data and understanding is really important. Also, understand who it is you're serving and who you're serving with, right? That's back to that
Mm.
assets based, framing for the folks, the abundance based framing. Um, and that means understanding them more deeply than just their careers in this place. Maybe you have a few teachers who are, professional physicians or professional musicians or whatever, right?
Mm.
So that bringing their whole selves to school means the school has access to a vastly more rich, set of experiences than just what it is they're supposed to teach that day, right?
Right.
So understanding, who you serve and who you're serving with is are other great data points to start. And you start that every year, right? In this conversation, often there's a teacher or two that changes from year to year. If not, there are circumstances of the adults that change
Right.
from year to year. Understand what those are, so people feel comfortable being their full selves and bringing their full selves to work every day, right? If they're feeling that way, they're more likely to create a classroom and a school culture where students feel the same.
Yeah, it's all self-repeating.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Double loop learning, to use one framework for it.
Nice.
Um, right.
I wonder, I mean, it's kind of a scary, hard time to be a teacher right now. I think there's a lot of change happening, especially in US schools and how we function and what's happening. And it can feel overwhelming, I'm sure, to be in a leadership position and to be navigating. So if you're talking to leaders who are kind of sitting in that funk right now? What are your biggest pieces of advice?
Well, most leaders we're working with now, it's not a funk they're in; it's a real sense of fear.
Mm,
There are conversations about the elimination of whole, parts of government that have been organized to support what happens in every school in the country,
to
and
protect learners.
right, and protect learners. And so there's a whole set of questions about what would life be like without those resources, without those supports, without those guideposts, without the research that's been pulled together. Um, and so it's less about funk, but more about fear. Um, and as you know, a fear response to things is natural, and also can be significantly problematic in that it leads you to not want to take risks.
Right.
And you cannot produce excellence without taking risks. It just doesn't happen. And so often the conversations I find I'm having, I just had it with a chief academic officer a couple of days ago, is really about the fact that despite everything, kids are coming every day.
Right.
They're here today. They're gonna be there tomorrow. And what have you got for them? That's the question. That's the question every teacher has. That's the question every leader has. Kids are coming. What are we going to do for them? Um, there's a stabilizing sense of that truth. Parents are still entrusting them to you,
Right.
um, and they're not gonna get what you have anywhere else but with you. So despite all these things that are happening that are sort of outside our current locus of control, let's find the energy and time and effort and momentum to change the things that are, so that we're better prepared to support them when they come tomorrow than we were today.
I swear we're mind melding right now because I just wrote down locus of control on my sheet over here. So I wonder if you might clarify there. What is within our locus of control as leaders? What are the things we should be focused on now?
um, in these days, I think being truthful about how we are ourselves feeling is
Yes.
within our locus of control, right? Um, Folks don't want to feel as if they're the only ones who are feeling this risk, this doubt, these worries. So be honest and transparent with folks about that is key. It's like, hey, I'm hearing it, watching the news, worried and stressed about it too. But let's stay focused on what we're here to do
Mm,
today, and deliver for our kids. Um, Always, within the confines of the school, you have the actual act of schooling that is your responsibility as
right.
leaders in the school. And so I myself would take solace in that, right? No one's leading this building but you. No one's in collaboration with other adults to deliver excellence in this school, except for you and those other adults. And so, be your best, most motivated, and most positive self as much as you can muster. And then
Right.
lean on one another when you can't. It's perfectly fine to say to someone, hey, Cindy, I am absolutely in a funk today. I read this thing about XYZ and one, two, three, and it's got me kind of
Freaking me
terrified
out.
about the future. So can you help, bring me forward, support me in this work, be at my side to deliver this XYZ? You know, when you entrust others to lean in and support you, it's the most powerful leadership competency, because that models for them that it's okay for them to do the same.
That vulnerability.
That vulnerability and that realization that no person is an island, right? And no
Beautiful.
one can be excellent all the time in every moment of every circumstances. That the world intrudes, and that's okay. we can feel our feels and still be great leaders and teachers.
Well, what I love about that is just, again, it's just that centering on, okay, this is the problem at hand. It's a
Mhm,
reality. It's something
mhm,
that's happening. We're not going to have toxic positivity and say it's not
mhm,
happening.
mhm,
But practically, these are the things that we can do. And these are the things that are completely out of our control. And
mhm.
worrying about those things isn't going to move the needle, but worrying about these things can and will, right? So
Mhm.
keeping that at the
Exactly
center.
right. I call it not borrowing tomorrow's problems today.
Beautiful.
Right? We don't know what's going to happen. We know what people are proposing, right? But we don't know what's going to happen. And so let's not borrow tomorrow's problems, right? Let's put our energies and our shoulders to today's, circumstances and opportunities, right?
Well,
And let tomorrow take care of itself.
and so often when you do that exercise, you realize that so much more is actually within your control than you think. Right? That like, okay,
Yeah.
potentially some scary thing, like some funding might fall through or some things
Mhm.
might happen that are absolutely going to have an impact.
Mhm.
And yet there's this list of 100 things that are within our control and still are accessible to us and move the needle. And like, I don't know, I think continuing the work rather than being paralyzed by fear is my
Mhm.
hope for educators right now, is
Mhm.
that like that is the theme I'm trying to push in the show right now, is like continuing the work. We know what kids and schools can and should be, and don't be bullied into not pursuing that.
Absolutely. Or shamed into not doing it, or being afraid, right? Because that's the other issue. There's a lot of fear about some words that folks are using in the work: DEI, equity, social justice, you know, and the main modus is really to produce a heightened sense of fear
Right.
in
Can I say
folks who
that?
are
Am I going to
operating
get
in
in
this
trouble?
work. Exactly. None of that matters. What matters is that you're leaning into the needs of the families you currently serve and leveraging their assets to produce what they aspire to for themselves and their families and their kids. It's simple enough. Whatever word you put on it, that's it. That's what it is. And it doesn't matter what those families look like. It doesn't matter how much money they have. It doesn't matter where they live in the world or where they used to live in the world. None of that matters. What matters is you've got a classroom or a school full of bright, brilliant young ones who are your messages to a future that you will never see, right? Because you're not going to live as long as they will.
Right.
Um, and what are you doing now to make sure that they can face those challenges powerfully and thoughtfully? My greatest fear is that we're passing to the next generation um, uh, problems that we ourselves haven't been able to solve.
Mm,
Racism, environmental degradation, you know, uh, uh, political polarization. I mean, the
right.
list goes on and on. And some of these problems are existential, right? That if they don't get solved, you know, some significant things might not happen. And our young people have to be ready. They have to be prepared. They have to be motivated to be a community with the others in the world to solve these challenges. And they won't get there with us living in fear. They won't get there with us worrying about what word we use. Um, you know what I mean?
Right.
They're going to get there because we're going to help them build the skills, learn what they need to think critically, right? And to be in community with others to solve these problems. And so, I mean, honestly, the I was hoping that the pandemic would have taught us this lesson. Globally, really, and here domestically, but it doesn't seem like we learned it, right? That schools aren't just places where we put kids to learn things,
Right. There's
right? They are
so
the
much more.
right. They are so much more. They're such an incredible asset to our world, to our culture. Um, they are an investment that we're making um, that can't but have extraordinary benefits.
Mm,
And so whatever dollar we can carve, whatever time we can spend to make them better places, uh, it'll be worth it, right? In
Couldn't
the
agree with
short
you
and
more.
long term, you know.
Couldn't agree with you more. Yeah, I love it. I love the work that you're doing to build that sense of abundance, and I love the framework that you've introduced. So just thank you so much for the positivity that you're bringing into the space, and beyond positivity, but a framework of how to actually live that every day. So it's very cool to talk with you about it.
Thank you very much, and I love, love, love what you're doing as well. Anytime you can lift up the voices of the folks who are trying to deliver for families and kids, the classic teach one, each one teach one. What this platform does is it allows what one does to teach hundreds, maybe even thousands, and so it's a force multiplier of good. And so thank you for committing your time and energy and effort to such a worthy process and project.
It's my honor. Thanks so much.
Very welcome. Thank you.